The sound of bones breaking echoed hoarsely and harshly. A miner had just been thrown from a shattered window, his face plunging into the dusty red earth. No one on the street dared approach. Men hastily pulled their hats down. Women dragged their children behind closed wooden doors. A bloody law of silence prevailed. Raising one's head now meant inviting death, or being deprived of the last remaining piece of land for survival. But there was one person who absolutely refused to bow. June sat motionless on the rotting wooden steps. Her small hands clutched the edge of her tattered linen dress so tightly that her knuckles turned white. At her feet was a shabby leather bag. That was all she had. No homeland, no family, no place to cling to. Yet her eyes showed no trace of panic. Those wide, eerily still eyes stared intently at the henchman, wiping blood from his sleeve, causing him to involuntarily falter. A seemingly weakling, on the verge of being crushed at any moment, was now radiating a silent defiance. "Why are you so sad?" A childish voice suddenly cut through the thick, deathly atmosphere. A boy of about 9 years old stood in her line of sight, looking at her with the strange understanding of a child accustomed to misfortune. But before June could utter a word, a strong, calloused hand, weathered by cracks in the mud and despair, suddenly yanked the boy back. "It's none of our business, Leo." It was Wyatt. The man with the massive shoulders was hunched over, hiding his son behind him, as if afraid of a pack of wild beasts. His voice was deep and heavy with an invisible pressure. Was he protecting the child, or trying to conceal the helplessness of a father on the brink of losing everything? The wind howled sharply. Wyatt's eyes met June's, a penetrating gaze into the hearts of two men bearing bleeding wounds. In this valley, about to be taken over, the penniless wanderer and the widow fleeing the truth. Ultimately, whose lifeline is whose? Darkness descended upon Red Creek in a flash, but the stifling heat of the laundry room at the edge of town clung to her skin. Thick steam billowed from the bubbling copper cauldrons, enveloping June's pale, sweat-drenched face. Her small hands were now red and blistered from the toxic alkaline soap and the grime from the miner's clothes. She bit her lip, draining all her strength into the mechanical friction. In a place where law was decided by the barrel of a gun, avoidance was now the only survival instinct. She longed to disappear into invisibility, for in her tattered cloth bag, her possessions amounted to only $4.30, just enough for 2 nights huddled in a leaky hotel room. 2 nights to take root or be swallowed whole by the merciless snow of the Wild West. But in Red Creek, even the desire to retreat into peace was a luxury. The grip of Judd's gang stretched out like an invisible spiderweb, suffocating the town's very breath. That evening, as she dragged her weary feet back to her room, June stopped at the doorway. On the decaying wooden floor, a steaming bowl of stew lay still. She recognized the chipped bowl. It belonged to the child from that afternoon, Leo, the son the burly man had hidden behind his back. And things became even more stifling when the hotel owner gave her a scrutinizing look and curtly said, "Someone has already paid for 3 more nights." June froze in the dark hallway. Her heart skipped a beat. This silent help offered no sense of security. On the contrary, it weighed heavily, like a warning. In this cruel frontier, no kindness comes without a price. Suddenly, the clatter of boots on the wooden floor echoed from the street below, signaling that Judd's hounds were beginning their patrol again. The flickering light of the storm lamp cast their shadows onto the wall of her room, huge, distorted, and menacing. Staring at the cooling stew, June's eyes darkened. The man named Wyatt had brought himself into her sights. his clandestine, outstretched hand to a stranger. Was it salvation from the abyss? Or was he inadvertently dragging them both into the same grave? Sunday afternoon passed over the Red Creek Valley with a deceptive tranquility. The wind ceased its howling, giving way to the muffled, disjointed sound of church bells. June sat huddled in the furthest corner of the decaying wooden bench on the porch. She was still trying to retreat behind an invisible defensive wall, desperately refusing all attention. Refusing even the dangerous kindness offered by the stew from the night before. But from avoiding, her gaze unconsciously shifted to observing. A few steps away, Wyatt stood awkwardly. The man's massive, sun-tanned shoulders looked out of place and strained as he bent down to comfort the two children. June's gaze froze, fixed on the back of Tessa's neck. The 6-year-old stood silently, her hair askew, tangled. The braid was tied roughly and awkwardly by calloused fingers, accustomed to gripping rifle butts and crushing barren earth. It was an invisible scar, the most clumsy attempt of a father trying to fill the void left by his deceased wife. At that moment, the icy wall in June's heart cracked slightly. The instinct of a woman who had shouldered everything herself since the age of 14 surged, overwhelming her survival instincts. Slowly, she approached. Without a word of formal greeting, her fingers, reddened by the alkaline soap, gently touched the child's soft hair. June carefully untied each stray strand of hair, straightened it, and meticulously braided it into a neat braid. The action was silent, still, yet carried the weight of profound solace. Wyatt didn't turn away. His bloodshot eyes were fixed on June's braiding hands. There was no cheap romance in his gaze, only the fierce judgment of someone seeking a safe haven amidst a storm. As June released her hands, the church bells ceased ringing. Wyatt leaned slightly toward her. Not a single empty thank you. The wind whipped his coat, revealing his tensed biceps. Saturday. His voice was deep and heavy, escaping through clenched teeth. Come to the farm. He paused, his jaw clenching in suppressed pain. I didn't invite you to dinner. I have something I need to show you. The words were spoken in a detached tone. It was not at all a gentle invitation. It carried the menace and weight of a bloody sentence, threatening to drag June into a quagmire from which she could never escape. On Saturday afternoon, the wind swept through the Red Creek Valley, biting at the skin. Wyatt's farm appeared on the barren hill, desolate and solitary. It didn't resemble a peaceful haven, but rather a fortress awaiting its fall. Everything here smelled of decay. The earth beneath their feet was cracked and barren, so dry it could cut through their heels. Wyatt led June to the back of the log cabin. No welcoming, no feigned politeness. He stopped before a withered vegetable garden where gray, decaying stalks lay slumped on the red-hot ground. His rough hands plunged deep into the furrow, crushing a handful of dry earth. Red dust slipped through his fingers, falling like the ashes of despair. In the corner of the garden, a stunted young apple tree writhed in the storm. It was the last vestige, planted by his late wife in their first year here. Now it was dying of thirst. The stark truth was laid bare. The illusion of a secure home shattered before June's eyes. This wasn't a lifeboat. It was a sinking, bleeding ship. "It's Judd," Wyatt's voice, hoarse and cutting through the howling wind, said. "He's blocked all the water from upstream. The well is dry. We're counting down to foreclosure." June froze. A chill ran down her spine, freezing any hope of a peaceful life. The imposing man standing before her was, in reality, cornered, unable to defend himself. Watson took a step forward. His massive frame cast a long shadow across the desolate ground. "I need someone to stay here, to take care of the children, to be in charge of this house forever." He slightly slumped his shoulders, swallowing his masculine pride. But I have no right to deceive you. Staying here isn't about choosing a family. You're choosing to enter a war with no turning back. The wind howled through the decaying wood. June stood motionless. Her hands, hidden beneath her dress, trembled violently. The door to survival, which had just opened, had instantly become the most cruel turning point fate had thrown into her life. Returning from Wyatt's deadly farm, despair once again clung to June in the dark, suffocating laundry room. But the stifling atmosphere of steam and alkaline soap was suddenly torn apart by a luxurious scent, completely out of place here. The smell of fine cigars and expensive leather. Judd stood there. The ruthless takeover of Red Creek wore a sleek, jet-black wool coat, a stark contrast to the murky water in the basins and June's reddened hands. He approached. His presence was leisurely yet oppressive, like a noose slowly tightening. "You just went up that hill." Judd's voice was smooth and slippery, yet it carried the venom of a rattlesnake. "Did you think that widower could protect you? That dry well? Or the empty stomachs of the children?" Judd leisurely reached into his pocket and pulled out a pure gold coin. He placed it on the damp wooden table. Click! The sound of the precious metal rang out brilliantly, crushing all resistance of poverty. Under the flickering oil lamp, the gold coin gleamed with the light of absolute security. For a wanderer with only $4.30 in her pocket, this gold coin was more than just money. It was a perfect velvet cage, a sturdy shield against the bone-chilling cold of the western winter. "That farm won't survive the winter, miss." He smiled chillingly, pressing her with the gaze of a hunter who had his prey in his grasp. "Choose. Enter my house as my lady, or drown in the dry mud with that widower." Judd turned his back and walked out the door, leaving a sharp ultimatum. "You have 24 hours to abandon your foolishness." The silence was suffocating. June stared at the gleaming gold coin on the table, then glanced out the dusty window. In the distance, amidst the raging sandstorm, Wyatt's dilapidated carriage trudged along. The silhouette of the solitary, stubborn man hunched over, bearing the weight of a family on the verge of collapse. Absolute safety or a fight to the bitter end? June's mind was torn in two, teetering on the edge of the most brutal choice. The Red Creek sky was a thick, gray, ominous expanse of impending storm. The steep, red dirt road leading from town to Wyatt's farm stretched endlessly and windswept. June trudged along, her steps heavy. In her small, reddened hand, the silver pocket watch, the only memento her late uncle had left her, was clutched so tightly it bled. The ticking of the watch's hands, that fragile sound, was her last resort. Sell it, and she would have enough money for a carriage ticket out of this deadly valley. Or turn back and pick up Judd's gold coins, and she would have a life of luxury. Flee or kneel. Those were the only two paths of survival the Wild West offered to the weak. But as she passed the noisy pub on the corner, where Judd's henchmen were laughing, spitting, waiting for the moment she would cast aside her pride and crawl at their boss's feet, June's steps suddenly halted. The fear that had once made her cower in the dark corner of the laundry room suddenly shattered, giving way to an extreme coldness. She remembered the clumsy touch on Tess's tangled hair, the meager bowl of stew placed outside her door, and Wyatt's desperate yet proud gaze in the withered garden. A safe haven built on cowardice is not a roof. It is merely a gilded tomb. June straightened her back. No more avoidance, no more resigned bowing of her head. The slender figure of the exiled woman silently cut across the street, tearing through the mocking glances of the henchmen, striding resolutely towards the hilltop. She had crossed the line in the sand. From this moment on, there was no turning back. Click. The hinges creaked dryly as June pushed open the wooden door. In the dimly lit room, Wyatt sat there. His face was etched with the scars of despair, his rough hands silently cleaning his double-barreled shotgun like someone preparing for their final death. "I agree." June's voice was sharp, shattering the suffocating silence of the house. She stepped forward, her eyes calm but burning with a deathly fire. "I will stay, but we will not sit here waiting to die." As soon as June's declaration of war ended, the price to pay struck in the silent night. The farm was plunged into thick darkness. The only sound tearing through the night's restraint was the muffled whimpering of little Tess. Fever and thirst tormented the child's tiny body. The family's last well, their fragile, last glimmer of hope, had now dried up, leaving only cracked, muddy, and hopeless mud. Wyatt sat motionless on the edge of the bed. In the pale moonlight filtering through the window, cold sweat beaded on the burly man's forehead. His hand, once gripping the trigger without trembling, now clenched tightly in utter helplessness. Violence or bullets could not produce a single drop of water to save his daughter now. Judd's grip had struck the most cruel Achilles' heel, depriving the children of their breath. But at the very moment Wyatt seemed to collapse, the unspoken order in this deadly house suddenly shifted. June didn't cry. The fear of the weak had been crushed. Instead, a mother's protective instinct erupted, blazing in her calm eyes. She quietly stepped forward, snatched the last damp cloth from Wyatt's hand, and meticulously wiped Tess's feverish forehead. Her movements were decisive, cold, yet so steady that Wyatt's slumped shoulders seemed to find an invisible support. The delegation of authority took place in silence. June officially became the one in charge of the crisis. Just as she stood up to check the water pipes, a series of sounds ripped through the night. The deafening pounding of hammers, the frantic neighing of horses. From outside the fence, streaks of bright red torches suddenly blazed, enveloping the farm's boundaries like a pack of bloodthirsty beasts. Through the crack in the door, they saw Judd's henchmen hastily driving stakes and strung sharp barbed wire, sealing off the only exit for the thirsty livestock. He didn't just want to collect the debt, he wanted to cut off all means of survival for this family before dawn. June pushed open the door and stepped onto the porch, her slender figure standing tall against the raging fire at the foot of the hill. Bang! A flash of lightning erupted from the darkness. A deafening explosion roared. The bullet lodged in the wooden post right next to June's shoe, piercing her flesh with sharp shards. A bloody warning, a gunshot, 1-to-1. The acrid smoke of gunfire drifted away on the howling wind of Red Creek. Under the pale moonlight, the newly erected barbed wire fences gleamed with a cold, cruel sharpness like the fangs of a pack of hungry wolves. Despair had reached its extreme, thick and hanging over their heads like a blade poised to strike. From the overwhelming darkness, pushing through the streaks of blazing torches, Judd calmly walked to the boundary. He no longer needed to conceal his depravity under a facade of politeness. His hand, clad in an expensive leather glove, held aloft a piece of parchment. The wind whipped against the paper, making a rustling sound. It wasn't a simple debt reminder. It was a death sentence. Signature of the town authorities. Judd's voice was vile, triumphant, and stiflingly cruel. Tomorrow, this farm, this land, and every living creature on it will officially be my property. It was a forged promissory note with a fake signature. A blatant, despicable robbery that the entire Red Creek Valley knew about, but no one dared utter a word. Wathy roared, charging toward the barbed wire fence, the sharp thorns drawing blood from his thigh. The father's eyes were bloodshot with rage. He aimed his shotgun at Judd's chest, but before he could pull the trigger, dozens of metallic clangs rang out simultaneously. The muzzles of the henchmen's guns were all pointed at the dilapidated log cabin and stables behind him. Judd's smile widened, twisted, and devilish in the torchlight. Hand over the original land title before dawn, or this fire will fly straight into the stables. He narrowed his eyes slightly, spreading utter terror. I know your 2 children are hiding behind that haystack in there. The air seemed to be drained of oxygen. June's heart felt as if it were being crushed by an iron hand. Leo and Tess's lives hung in the balance on the crackling torch in the beast's hand. Wyatt froze. The massive frame of a weathered man trembled violently in agonizing pain. There was no turning back, no boundaries left for resistance. Crack! The dry, chilling sound of breaking bones echoed. The overwhelming force of hatred had crushed Wyatt's fingers, bending them against the rigid gun stock. They had been driven to their deaths. The approaching dawn brought no life, only a cold countdown to the final moments of a family about to be burned to ashes. Before the morning mist could dispel the biting cold, the wooden doors of the Red Creek Bank were violently flung open. Not a single tear fell. On the cold transaction counter, the silver pocket watch, June's only memento, her last safe haven, was smashed down. The jarring clang of metal. It was the sound of a cruel sacrifice, selling the flesh and blood of the past to redeem a life in the present. That ticket was exchanged for a bright red receipt, stamped with a debt release seal. Across the valley, the sky had just been streaked with a blood-red mist. At the farm boundary, Judd's torch was lowered, ready to be thrown into the hay where the 2 children huddled together. Just as the fiery blade was about to lick down, June lunged forward, ignoring the barbed wire tearing at her dress. The receipt was brandished right in front of the henchman's guns. The bright red bank stamp struck Judd's eyes, completely tearing apart the fabricated robbery verdict. The debt was paid. Legally, the farm was saved. The pride of a ruthless takeover had just been trampled underfoot by a woman from a foreign land. Judd roared in fury. Completely discarding his facade of respectability, he drew his wolf-fang dagger and thrust the sharp point straight at June's chest. Thump! The chilling sound of the steel blade piercing flesh echoed horrifyingly. But it wasn't June who fell. Wyatt, with his hand shattered and broken, rushed forward, using his massive body to take the full force of the brutal stab. Dark red blood gushed out, soaking the man's coat, dripping heavily onto the barren land he had just risked his life to protect. Judd's torch fell, setting half the stable ablaze in the wind. Faced with irrefutable legal evidence, Judd bitterly ordered a retreat, leaving behind chilling curses carried away by the sandstorm. Dawn broke over Red Creek. No triumphant songs were sung. Only the figure of June knelt on the ground, her reddened, trembling hands clutching Wyatt's profusely bleeding wound, amidst the acrid smoke of fire and ashes. Winter descended upon the Red Creek Valley, bringing with it icy gales that howled through the decaying wood of the dilapidated house. Everything around the farm appeared desolate and silent. Half the stables have been reduced to a pile of black ashes after the night of fierce fighting. The acrid smell of burning wood still clinging to the air. There were no brilliant miracles or glorious transformations after defeating evil. Victory in the West always came with a brutal price of blood and sacrifice. The silver pocket watch, the last remaining link to the past, June's safe haven, was forever locked away in the bank's cold vault. Clang! The sound of a hammer striking a rusty nail echoed dryly. Wyatt was straining to repair the awning that had been destroyed by the storm. Each time he swung his massive arm, the bandages under his shoulder seeped out a dark liquid. Judd's fatal stab wound hadn't healed, but the scarred man wouldn't allow himself to fall again. June stepped out from the doorway. She brought no empty platitudes or weak pity. In this harsh frontier, love wasn't expressed in words, but proven by how they bore the desolation together. Her eyes narrowed, looking towards the desolate corner of the garden. Beneath the icy snow, on the stunted apple tree that seemed long dead, a tiny green sprout had just cracked its bark, tenaciously taking root deep in the cracked earth. Darkness slowly descended, enveloping the valley. No triumphant music could be heard. Inside the dilapidated wooden house, the flickering fire in the fireplace cast shadows of 4 people huddled together. June sat quietly on the rocking chair. Her hands, covered in scratches and redness, gently stroked the hair of little Tess, who slept peacefully in her arms. Wyatt limped forward. His other hand, unharmed, gently threw another small piece of wood into the fire. They exchanged absolutely no promises. Only the crackling sound of dry wood could be heard. Wyatt looked up. June turned to him. Their eyes briefly met in the stillness of the night. It was the empathetic gaze of those consumed by the cruelty of fate until only ashes remained. Yet they decided to use those very ashes to nurture a new life. The crackling fire faded. Silence enveloped them. The screen sank into endless darkness, leaving a heavy, poignant, yet complete aftertaste. Bleeding wounds will heal, and beneath the cold ashes, a new life will always sprout. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. If you find empathy and enjoy the authentic, intense, yet deeply human scenes of the Wild West, please subscribe to the channel. Your companionship is the flame that warms and empowers us to continue uncovering untold stories of the borderlands. Goodbye, and see you again.